210 days ago, July. She cries silently, sitting in the corner of the living room, dimly lit by one small bulb and a lantern that has a wooden base of an Asian carved eagle. Every night when the sun sets, my mother goes to the corner to turn on the light as darkness falls over our house. She almost always says, "Your little brother hated the dark." I have resisted attending storytelling events that Browning had so lovingly created for our communities. An event in which I had spoken, and someone at the storytelling center had seen me speak and invited me to speak. I resisted writing extensively in a journal that a dear colleague sent me to work out my grief. I didn't think I was ready to open the door to my own grief. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Perhaps in all of my caretaking, I was waiting for everyone else in my family to be done with grief, to be headed towards some sort of closure before I start my own journey. I filled my days with work. There was so much to be done to deal with my brother's estate, to deal with the minutia of sorting out finances and everyday things like passwords, keys, cell phones, and to take care of his surviving partner. And in my job as Chief Diversity Officer, I was so incredibly busy with work on anti-racism, on helping support others on our campus at times struggling with the workload, with the anger and frustration at me, at the university, at higher education, and our inability to address systemic anti-Black racism. These months since my younger brother's death from COVID-19 at the end of March are now a blur and seem so very far away at another time. 320 days ago, March, my younger brother is hospitalized with COVID-19 out of state while traveling and is put on a ventilator within days. Airports are closed. It is the height of the first wave of the pandemic in March 2020 when things were closing down. We can't travel. They wouldn't let us into the hospital anyways. No closure. He passes away March 31st with none of his family by his side, states away from us. No closure. His body cannot be transported because his body is contaminated and a biohazard. No closure. I have to hastily arrange an online funeral so we don't lose our spot in the crematorium. I have to tell my parents. No closure. He is cremated so many miles away from home, without a chance for us to burn incense, burn paper money, wish him well on his journey. No closure. His ashes in an urn sit in the corner of our front room where my elderly mother and father, 85 and 88, sit every morning and every night, sometimes talking to him, sometimes silently, just with their hands on his urn. The double grief of loss and not having closure is one that is horribly familiar to so many from the loss of COVID-19, and also to others from violent racist brutality and other systemic inequities. The loss of numerous elderly whose lives were so casually reduced by politicians and public voices by comments such as, "They are old anyways, and they live their life already," is particularly horrific when in fact each elder lost is a library of human experience, cultural knowledge, language knowledge, and a reservoir of oral history stretching generations back. 500,000 souls lost in this world in the US in the most horrific way of suffering. And on top of that horrific arc of loss, fear, and grief, the centuries-old arc of white supremacy wreaking havoc as it always has, but with a fervor particularly intertwined with the toxic political context we find ourselves in, is mind-numbing. 150 days ago, September. Closure is often described as a comforting or satisfying sense of finality that victims need. It is also described as something or an entity, such as a satisfying ending that provides such a sense of comfort. I realized one day that what I was seeking was closure where closure is not possible. I wanted a nice, neat emotional package with a bow to tie it off. I wanted my grief and anger to be expended and then put away so that I could get back to work and be of use. You see, it's the first time in my life I have not been able to work through not having closure. I have suffered grief before. I have suffered anger and great loss before at racial inequities, racist attacks, racists winning and getting away with their actions. Through all of those things, I've been able to weather it, to know that there would be no closure, no arc of moral revenge, no clapback, that sometimes bad people and bad things happen to good people. My Buddhist beliefs and how I saw the world as spiritually connected, seeking balance and community, helped me anchor my own being in that flow. I would dive right back in to try to do the work, try to connect, and that was enough. 60 days ago, December. What I fear most, what I know in my heart, is that I am dangerously close to losing faith in the human capacity for good. I am so close I can taste it and feel that sadness suck all of the air out of my lungs on a daily basis. I have to ask myself, what if people aren't in fact inherently good? What if we are inherently bad, that if left with no guardrails, no social pressure rewards for good behavior, and no connection to others, would we just take from each other endlessly? What if I didn't believe that the impact we have makes a difference that matters? I have never been an optimist. In my profession, I am trained to map out the worst case scenarios given everything I know about incredibly discriminatory and abusive people and how horrific they can be. I weather talking to people about horribly inequitable treatment and work with terribly inadequate institutional tools to try to effect some sort of remedy, often knowing that there is no closure. I know that our institutions are not built for us, not built for historically marginalized people. We live in an imperfect world, doing imperfect work with imperfect resources under imperfect conditions. But if we connect, if we honor process, we'll be able to move forward, build on that work, and improve institutions for others. But this calculus has failed me as of late. 40 days ago, the clipped chug and whir of the needle going up and down as I top stitch a fabric mask is steady, and the line near the edge of the reusable mask I am making is satisfyingly straight. I lift my foot off the pedal, pivot the mask on the needle, and go speeding down the side of the mask, inserting the end of a beaded ear loop. This one is made of fabric with beautiful floral designs sprinkled with sketches of honeybees. I do this 30 more times. I'll be sending these along with masks mailed to me from other sewists in the Auntie Sewing Squad. I will mail this batch of 200 to the Skokomish tribal community up in Washington for their elders' food distribution program. I tell you this not to brag or to prove how good of a person I am, but because this sewing has in some ways saved my soul. I have been lurking in this Auntie Sewing Squad group. I was so overwhelmed with grief and work, numb and lacked confidence in sewing abilities. The masks they post were truly stunning and beautiful. I participated by cheering on other sewists, reading their posts on their favorite mask patterns, and watching them organize massive requests for masks for the Navajo Nation, other tribal communities, migrant farm workers, civil rights groups, and programs for the unhoused. The group calls itself ASS, Auntie Sewing Squad, or ASS in jest. It is led by someone who is named Kathleen Wong, no relation to me, a performance artist who became unemployed when shelter in place happened, when was enraged at the lack of PPE for everyone, enraged at the government's incompetency, but especially for historically vulnerable communities. We call her the Overlord because she runs this kick-ass group of aunties. I saw miracles every day of at first mostly Asian American sewing group, as if their lives depended on it, because their lives and the lives of others did. They sewed for BLM groups in solidarity and anger about racist police brutality, and for tribal communities in solidarity and anger about the lack of resources and outright genocidal disregard for Native peoples. Aunties sewed through their own losses, diagnoses of cancer, and job displacement. They made them with the ethos that the masks must be attractive, well made with care, not made out of pity and charity. And so I come to you today to share that I found my way back to my faith in goodness of people by sewing in community with others. Sewing one mask at a time, knowing that I cannot sew 200 myself, knowing that these masks make a difference. My sewing has felt like a meditation, affirmation, and an act of community action. I no longer need the closure that I had wanted so badly. I know that my parents may never recover from the loss of my younger brother. I have always known that white supremacy is a part of our historical DNA, is embedded in all of our systems in society. There is no closure, no arc of a clear path of resistance, or to wholeness for my parents, but one stitch at a time, one connection at a time, one moment of grace, one voice spoken out of turn, one policy rewritten with care, one protest, one demand letter, one phone bank call to vote. All of these acts of faith in good will always make a difference.